Hello and welcome to the Sci-Fi Christian book reviews brought to you by the Sci-Fi Christian.com. I'm Ben DeBono and I am going to review for you today 3001, the Final Odyssey, the thankfully last book in Arthur C. Clarke's Odyssey Quartet. Why do I say thankfully, given that I have enjoyed the other three books, at least moderately up to this point? Well, I can sum it up like this. 3001 sucked. This book was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. And it didn't need to be. In fact, I'm just shocked by what a mess this book is on nearly every single level. It pissed me off. I mean, I'm just so annoyed that we've gone from the classic of 2001, this great science fiction movie, this great science fiction novel, and we get to the next two sequels and they're okay, they're not as good, they've got some problems, we've talked about that. Now we get to this one and it's an embarrassment. Arthur C. Clarke should be embarrassed, well, if he was still alive. When he was alive, he should have been embarrassed that he let this book out. This book reads like a poorly written first draft where he threw out a bunch of ideas that he might like to explore in the book, kind of shuffled them together, and then just decided to ship it off to the publisher because what the hell, people are going to buy it anyway. But this book sucked. Let's start at the beginning, maybe. So we get Frank Poole, who's from 2001, the guy who, Hal sends floating off into the far reaches of space and everything. He is the counterpart to David Bowman, and it's 3001, and they've recovered his body, and he's back awake again. Okay, fair enough. I can accept that concept. And then the first third of the book is basically him reorienting himself to what it's like in 3001. And this part of the book is actually pretty interesting. In fact, I was really enjoying the novel at this point. It doesn't start to fall apart until after we kind of get past this initial Frank Poole explores and learns about the future in 3001 and all of that. So it's fairly interesting, because Arthur C. Clarke explores some cool ideas of the future or whatever. And that's one of the things that's maybe going to be a common theme in this review, is that there are interesting ideas here, but like I said, the problem with this book isn't that it's just nonsense, it's that it feels like Arthur C. Clarke has all of these different pieces, he shuffles them together and just ships it off to the publisher without bothering to actually turn them into a novel. So the beginning's okay. It's fine. I was enjoying it about as much as I enjoyed the last two sequels. So I was thinking, okay, this one's about on par. It's still not at 2001 level, but what the heck? We're not really expecting that at this point. But it's as good as the other two sequels. So we're doing well here through the first third of the book. But then you realize that, well, this is interesting. Nothing has actually happened in the book outside of Frank Poole waking up. And for me, I was thinking of the epilogue to 2061, where it's set in the year 3001, and the TMA-0 monolith, which is in front of the UN headquarters, wakes up, and then Lucifer goes out. The second sun that Jupiter became goes out, so now the night sky's returned, and it's like, oh, now the monoliths are doing something again. That doesn't really ever happen. So again, we have the same problem that we've had in the other sequels of Clarke setting things up, saying, this is where we're going to go, and then not going there. And I'm fine with not having answered questions. But the problem with this series is it says we're going to answer this question, we're going to explore this, and then it doesn't. Perfect example. End of 2001. We get David Bowman hovering over Earth. What's going to happen? Here's the next stage of human evolution. I'm fine if you want to leave it there. I don't need an answer to that question. But then you come out with a sequel, and that's the lingering question, and then not only do you refuse to explore that question in any of the sequels, but you take it in a complete different direction where, oh, I guess David Bowman wasn't the next evolutionary step. We find out in this book that he's just a emulation inside of one of the monoliths, so maybe David Bowman doesn't even exist anymore. He might be dead for all intents and purposes. I guess he didn't really evolve. That was all nonsense at the end of 2001, it turns out, at least from the perspective of this book. And it's like, okay, you didn't need to answer the question. You didn't need to, but then when you wrote 3 sequels, and you explore it more, and then you refuse to answer the question that you yourself posed at the end of the first book, and instead you just write a bunch of crap to retcon what you did, it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. So that's point 1, is that we get to the end of this first part, and nothing much is happening. And then Frank Poole's going to go down to Europa for a while, but first we meet this guy who's kind of sort of not really an atheist, and he says some stuff about religion. I'm going to get to in a minute, because I do want to talk about that, because that was just a whole other problem in this book. And then Frank Poole goes down to Europa, and that goes fine, and then he's back, and then it's 30 years later. And now the book is almost over. I'm not sure in terms of page count, but I'm reading the Kindle edition, and you've got like 400 sections or whatever out of 2,500 to go, and the plot hasn't actually started yet. And so then at the end, Arthur C. Clarke remembers that he was supposed to write a novel, not just throw a bunch of random crap onto the computer screen and hit print. And so he throws in this whole deal about how the monoliths, and this is spoilers, but it doesn't matter. It's a crap book. Don't read it. Okay? And so he throws in all this stuff about how the monoliths phoned home when humans first discovered them, 450 years ago, 500 years ago, whatever. And now, so 500 light years away, it hits the makers, creators, or whatever. Now the message is coming back with the monolith's orders, and it's kill the humans. Okay, so this is a nice tacked on plot that it turns out that here we are 1,000 years later, and instead of helping the humans, and which the monoliths were supposed to do, for some inexplicable reason, the monoliths are now going to kill us. But don't worry, because we have a computer virus, and we'll pull that out of the vault that humans have stored their computer viruses in. We'll inject it into the monolith, thanks to David Bowman helping us out, and then everything's good. And that plot is like the last 15% of the book, is that he just tacks this on. And it's so stupid. It's like, okay, if that was going to be your plot, set it up. I'm not saying it needs to be the whole thing you talk about, but, let's not just have it feel like this cheap epilogue that, oh yeah, there's novels are supposed to have plots. We better throw one of those in here. I mean, it just feels like garbage. This whole book is just garbage in terms of how it's written, in terms of how it's edited. But then we get to the real thing that bugged me in this book, which is the discussion of religion. So here we are in the year 3001, and humanity, well, it's not an atheistic society. Clarke makes that clear, and I do think he's right on what he's describing. He's not describing an atheistic society. So the possibility of God remains open. But humans have outgrown, matured beyond religion. Okay. So obviously I disagree. That's fine. Whatever. I made a point in my 2001 review, the first book, that I don't mind that Arthur C. Clarke is an atheist or whatever he is, that he doesn't like religion. Fine. I think that there's interesting discussions to be had there. I'm not threatened by somebody who doesn't agree with what I think. what I'm looking for isn't to read stuff that lines up with my worldview. I'm looking for stuff that I can enter into an intellectual conversation with. I felt like 2001 did that, even in the places that don't line up with my worldview. I feel like a lot of Arthur C. Clarke's stuff does that. He puts out his view, which isn't mine, but he does it in such a way that it invites conversation. I think that's great. Not so in 3001. Instead, we get a chapter where we get this one character who seemingly shows up out of nowhere, who just decides to go on a rant about how religion is a form of insanity. And that's why we should reject it, because all it does is cause wars and everything. I mean, that's the stupidest argument in the world. It does nothing to open up conversation. I mean, the whole all religion does is start war stuff is bullshit. You know, I'm sorry for my language, but it's bullshit. It's like, that's you know, the type of argument that you expect from a college freshman. Has religion caused wars? Yes. Has religion done enormous amounts of good in our world? Yes. So a real conversation about the value of religion isn't just going to throw up this straw man BS argument and then expect that to be good enough to start a conversation. Second of all, if you want to start a conversation with people who are religious reading your book, you want them to think about your ideas, the best way to do that is probably to not call them insane. So Arthur C. Clarke just paints this broad stroke across all religion. All it does is start wars. That's it. And everybody who sincerely believes in religion is insane. That's it. So there's no room to actually have that intellectual dialogue with the ideas in the novel. There's nothing here that invites people who are religious, like myself, to actually consider the ideas. It's a slap across the face. It's the intellectual equivalent of a hit and run. I'm going to insult you and then close off your argument because anything you say in support of religion, it just enforces my idea that you're antagonistic, there go the wars again, and you're insane because you can't accept my rationalism. It's just nonsense. It's nonsense. And and the point I'm making, and I hope this comes across, the point I'm making isn't that it's nonsense because it disagrees with me. It's not nonsense because it's anti-religion. It's nonsense because of the way it goes about making that case. That it does so in a way that shuts down conversation, that's not going to convert a single religious person to his point of view. Not one sincere religious person is going to read this argument and go, oh yeah, I guess I was insane. I should work on that. It's not a serious take on religion from a historical, psychological, sociological perspective. None of that. It's not serious at all. It's a straw man argument that, like I said, is intellectual hit and run, and it's just pathetic. It's just pathetic. And let me be clear, just out of fairness, that there's plenty of religious stuff that does the same thing in the opposite direction, and that's pathetic too. You know, take whatever point of view you want, but defend it and present it with intellectual integrity, not with straw man crap. So this novel drove me nuts. It started off really good, well, good enough, but it just devolved into absolute nonsense. It's a disaster from a writing perspective. It's a disaster from an idea perspective. It's not befitting of the series. It's not befitting of Arthur C. Clarke. He's better on both the intellectual perspective and the storytelling perspective in so much of his work. He can do better. This is pathetic. It's a pathetic book. And now I have to decide what I want to rate it. Because I did like the beginning, and I thought the beginning had some interesting ideas about the future. So I can't just say there's nothing good here. So I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5, and that's generous. Maybe a 1.5 out of 5. I mean, it's just the worst. It's so bad. Yeah, 1.5, 2, somewhere in there, because yeah, some of his ideas about the future do come through, and they're interesting and thought-provoking and all that. But, you know, that's pretty much anything worthwhile. This book takes place in the first quarter. If you read that and then stop, you're not missing anything, because after that it just becomes garbage, start to finish. So, wow, I didn't like it, in case you couldn't tell. Really, 2001 is a masterpiece. None of these sequels live up to its legacy. None of them come even close. The first two are passable, but they have problems. 3001 takes those problems, amplifies them, and then adds on a whole bunch of its own. If you ask my opinion, stick to the first one. It's a masterpiece. It will engage your imagination and your intellect. It's everything you love about science fiction, but read that one, watch that movie, and stop. Because even the next two, well, they're okay. They're just not worthy of being considered in the same series. And by all means, don't read 3001. This book is garbage. Probably my least favorite read so far this year. And I'm shocked by that because I was actually enjoying it at the beginning. But no, it falls apart in pretty major ways. Unreal. Arthur C. Clarke. Again, you're dead, so this message isn't getting to you. But I'll say it anyway. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're better than this. This book was pathetic. I'm Ben DiBono. This is the Sci-Fi Christian Book Reviews. Goodbye.